All right. Okay, we are live. Hello, my name's BZ Douglas. I'm here with Mariah Crenshaw of Chasing Justice LLC, and we're here today to talk about the Luke Stewart civil trial. For anyone who's not familiar with the story of Luke Stewart, in March of 17, Luke was sleeping in his car and a neighbor called in a suspicious vehicle report. She didn't recognize the car and called the Euclid police. And the first on the scene was Officer Catalani, and he inspected the vehicle. This is the abbreviated version. We're going to get into a lot of the
Okay.
details, but as far as like the shortest version I can give you, Officer Catalani arrived, sees a man sleeping in his car, and what he believes to be a screw top from a wine bottle and a scale with some kind of residue on it. And he calls in his partner, Officer Matthew Rhodes, tells him over the radio, "We're going to end up pulling this guy out of the car." That's a quote that'll become important. And when Rhodes arrives, Catalani waves and knocks. Luke waves back and immediately tries to start the car, at which point Catalani tries to rush in. Rhodes climbs all the way into the car, and Luke takes off. And during what's basically the traveling distance of 2 blocks, during which time, in the case, it's disputed the exact number, but it's pretty safe to say the car never got above what 20 miles
He
an
said
hour.
13. 13
13,
miles an
yeah,
hour.
probably is the range that we're looking at. And Officer Rhodes was so terrified that he said, this is what he claims, he was so terrified he might be thrown from the car or that Luke might erratically drive into someone, that he punched Luke, he tased Luke, he punched Luke with the taser, and then ultimately fired 4 shots into Luke's chest and neck, killing him. So Matthew Rhodes has evaded justice due to the doctrine of qualified immunity when it comes to criminal prosecution. And what I've been covering all week, and Mariah Crenshaw has been joining me down at the courthouse, has been the civil trial that Luke's mother, Mary Stewart, is filing against Rhodes. So, Mariah, do you want to talk about anything like overall with this case so far?
Well,
You might want to get close on the mic too. I
okay.
don't think I have them too loud. If can't anyone can't hear us,
Maybe
just let us
turn it.
know.
Okay, maybe
Yeah,
this will be a little
yeah,
bit
you
better.
can
Okay.
angle it however you need.
So, you saw a little bit more of it than I did. I left a little early on Monday, but I was there for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, listening to testimony, and I have to say that I just don't believe the course of events that was set forth, especially by Louis Catalani, especially by Louis Catalani. I have a very different perception and interpretation of what probably happened that morning
You
than
know,
what has been testified to.
and everyone has good reason to wonder what exactly happened that morning, because you may have noticed in my telling of the story, at no point did I mention that Officer Catalani or Rhodes turned on their dash cams, their body cams, or the red and blue lights, which would have automatically
Correct.
activated the dash cams and notified Luke that he was even dealing with police officers, because all they had was blinding takedown lights, which the descriptions of the layout of everything, Luke would have woken up with bright lights in his face, b a strong silhouette in the window, that it's very it's a point of contention in the case with the lawyers as to whether or not it's reasonable to believe Luke would have even recognized them as police,
Correct.
and neither of them, under their own admission, identified themselves as police.
Right.
Rhodes tries to claim at some point during the struggle that he heard Luke say police, but Officer Catalani's testimony directly contradicted that. And
I think
Catalani
it was
was
reversed.
no, Catalani was, when he was describing being right on top of Luke and pulling him out of the car, and that they're basically shoulder head to head as he's pulling on him. They asked him, "Did you hear Luke say anything?"
Right.
And according to Catalani's testimony, he was with Luke, the closest to Luke, the whole time, and he said no. Whereas Rhodes, who's on the other side of Luke, and pushing says that, oh, he heard Luke say something about police.
Well, I thought it was interesting when Catalani testified that he didn't even know Matthew Rhodes was in the car. That all this tugging that he's doing and pulling on Luke and having Luke so close to him, he stated he didn't smell any marijuana, he smelled no liquor. He was so close to him that he could, be able to smell something on Luke while he's pulling him. He said he didn't smell anything, but yet his partner, who's in the car, that's supposed to be pushing and to assist him to get him out of the vehicle, he doesn't see his partner at all. Like he was like, no, I didn't see him. I didn't know he was in the car until afterwards when I saw
Right.
the car leaving, and then I started running down the street. And then he gives this testimony about he was running down the street. I was running down the street and I thought Rhodes was behind me. I thought he was running behind me. I didn't know he
And
was still in the car.
I think this speaks to, like, if we're going to kind of walk through what's happened so far this week. Obviously, the first thing is jury selection, which I do not have any footage of because that would be very problematic. But it's one of my favorite parts of watching a trial now. This is the second trial I've watched. So I'm going to watch from beginning to end. But day one, we had opening statements. And so the plaintiff, Luke Stewart's mother, Mary, their argument put forward by Sarah Gelsomino of Freeman Gilbert and I'm getting it FG and G. That's why live streams are nice. They can
Exactly.
be loose. So I'll get it later when I print out the version of the story. It'll
Well,
be
yeah,
accurate.
she was the lead.
She was the lead. And the-
attorney on the plaintiff.
And
The
the-
plaintiff.
argument they're putting forward is that Rhodes behaved recklessly. So that's
Which
what
he did.
that's what they need to prove. And actually, we have a little bit here we can play of the beginning of the opening statement, and I think it'll set up the discussion pretty well. Whoops, wrong button.
That's us.
Not us. Let's do Sarah. Oh. Wait, let's do this. We're gonna fix our sound before we.
Don't you guys just love technology? It's like
Yeah, it's
I
great.
get fascinated watching you do all this stuff. Like I barely can text right and send a picture.
Oh my goodness, I can't even click the thing I need to click. Okay, we're gonna do it this way. There we go. What is this is strange. Okay, there we go. All right, we can play. Let's close this. And here we go. I promise it's going to happen.
In this case, there are two important safety rules, which we contend to prove to you throughout this case that Officer Rhodes violated when he recklessly acted and killed Luke Stewart. Rule number one. An officer can never use deadly force unless he faces an imminent, immediate threat of death or great bodily harm. An immediate threat right before him. You will hear evidence in this case that we all agree, everyone in this room agrees that that is the safety rule that Defendant Officer Rhodes has to follow. When an officer fails to follow this rule and he causes harm, he must be held responsible for that harm. The second rule, rule number two, a police officer can never act recklessly. Recklessly. When an officer does act recklessly and he causes harm, he must be held responsible for that harm.
Yeah, so I mean, that's in a linchpin what they need to prove. And so the witnesses they've called so far this week are Matthew Rhodes, Louis Catalani, not in this order, but kind of in order of importance of telling the story. Then we also heard from the medical examiner, Dr. David Dolinik, and the expert, the plaintiff's expert witness on police procedures. And I want to get his name right. It was Mr. Tucker. And then we also heard from this week the
EMT.
family. We heard from the EMT as well, Andrew Basic. Chief Melvin Tucker, that's the police chief and police procedure expert. And then we also heard from several family members.
And Mitchell Hauser, who is the
yes.
training, and I'm gonna wait. I can't wait to
We're
get to
going to
this
get
part.
to Mitch for sure.
Yeah, Mitchell Hauser, who
And you
is
caught
the
all.
training.
Thankfully, you caught all of his testimony.
Yes, I did.
And then we heard from Mary Stewart, Tara Stewart, and Tony or Cleander Stewart, and all of them testifying to who Luke was. They didn't as much have testimony to anything material to the night of his killing, but what he meant to the family, because that gets to the damages, right, of him being taken away.
Correct.
And that leads to some of the most ghoulish parts of the cross-examination, because we'll get into the parts of the cross-examination where they're trying to minimize things and divert from whether or not something was reckless. But the cross-examination of the family members, all of them, was always like one or two questions like, well, you have someone that's helping you out now, though, right? It's not so bad. It's kind of like it's not that bad. You still have help, and that just seems to be there. Those questions just seem to be to minimize,
Of course they are.
The punitive damages or the damages for compensating the
Right.
loss of Luke's as a support member in their lives.
I think that's the thing that will always annoy me and bother me about these type of cases and defense attorneys. Is that they're actually able to minimize the value of the human life and the loss of a loved one, and to make it seem like Luke was just a car. He wasn't a real person. So you got another car, didn't you? So you're getting around, aren't you? Wait a minute, you're taking Uber, but you're still moving. And so I really hate that they're able to do that. It just kind of makes you wonder about what type of person can, do that in his job. My job should not require me to dehumanize another human being, and to make it appear like the family didn't lose someone that was very precious to them. Another one of those, reasons when we say, Mariah, why aren't you practicing? And this is, probably
there's a ghoulish detachment you have
extremely
to develop.
ghoulish.
Yeah.
Extremely ghoulish when you can dehumanize another person and the value of that person. It's something wrong with that. But in all due respect to the defense, I have to say they really did help the case more than they hurt the case with the witnesses that they put on.
Yeah, well, they were the ones who called Catalani, and so we get to what are the points of contention where what is the plaintiff trying to emphasize to show recklessness, and what is the defense trying to minimize or to reframe in order to say no, this was appropriate and right.
Correct.
I wonder, for me, I hope that one of the biggest hurdles the jury has to get to in all this, because they really get into the minutia of the moment to moment, like what happened with Officer Rhodes and Catalani. But I really hope somewhere in the back of the jury's mind, as someone who's thought about this case for now almost 2 years, why did they have to engage Luke at all? Because this was a call from a person who said, I see a car outside my window. It's got tinted windows. I don't know it. I don't feel necessarily safe for whatever reason. So the officers drove up. They saw there's nothing to be worried about. It's a man sleeping in his car. And if you're going to say, okay, we're going to be extra careful, make sure he wasn't sleeping just so that he was going to wake up and attack someone on the street. What is the worst fear of this strange man in the car? That will happen, right? Why couldn't they have parked across the street and just kept an eye out?
Well, what I perceived in my interpretation, I'm kind of, coining Louis Catalani and Matthew Rhodes. They're my interpretation, my perception of what was being, of what they did was this was a common practice for them. This was not something that they didn't do and do often. This is the one we know about. This is the one that, okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the one that we actually know happened. And so I'm sure there are more cases out there of what they did. And honestly, like when I'm watching Matthew Rhodes in the courtroom, he's really trying to figure out how did it escalate to the point where he ended up killing Luke, because we've done this so many times before and it's never backfired on us the way it did. And there's, and you could see in his face that he's trying to figure out, how did I get here? Like, how did this happen? Well, it happened because you've been doing this for a very long time. And you've gotten away with it many, many times. And this time it just really backfired on you. And I think that, in my opinion, there are some serious inconsistencies in both of their stories. There's a huge gap that's missing. And I can say this. I think that Matthew Rhodes is telling the truth from what he is actually saying. I think he's withholding some truth. I don't think he's telling it all, but I think that what he said so far has been truthful. Versus Louis Catalani, I think everything that's come out of Catalani's mouth has been an outright lie. I just don't believe anything that has come out of Catalani's mouth.
Well, the only thing we have to go off of, as I said, because there's no body cam, there's no dash cam footage, is the fact is the dispatch logs and the audio.
The time.
So we know the time the call came in.
Right.
Then we know the time that Catalani responded and then called in. And so this gets to another thing that's become a point of debate in the trial. So on the dispatch audio, what Catalani says is, we're going to end up pulling this guy out of the car.
I think he didn't say end up. I think he said we're going to pull this guy out.
Yeah.
I think he was literal about that.
But it was we're going to pull this guy out.
Yeah.
Pull this guy out of the car absolutely was said.
Exactly.
And that has always been something that, like, when we were putting out the story in the documentary, it's like to highlight that it was preordained. We're going to take him out of the car.
Right. But there's an inconsistency even in that. When Catalani testifies, Catalani says, I say it all the time. This is something I say all the time. And then Matthew Rhodes was like, no, I've never heard him say this before. So
they went back and forth because he's trying to say that when he said that over the radio, it was a euphemism for, we're going to question him and then ask him to get out of the car if we need to.
Right.
We're going to do,
Which is, I'm sorry, but when you say we're going to pull someone out the car, there is no other way to interpret that statement.
And they know it's bad, and that's why they're trying to turn it into, it was some sort of euphemism.
Yes.
So that was one of the big inconsistencies between the two of them. Is that Catalani saying, I say this all the time, and Rhodes was like, I don't
ever recall him saying that before. Like, this is the first time that, he heard him say it. And I believe Rhodes. I'm going to tell you, I do believe his testimony. I think, like I said, there's a huge gap in his testimony, which I would really like to know what he's not saying. But I think that what he said so far has been, for the most part, truthful. I think there's some real inconsistencies when it comes to the positions of the vehicles and who actually turned on the shot light.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some inconsistencies on that as well. I believe it was Catalani who testified when he pulled his vehicle up behind Luke's car and turned on the shot lights
Yeah.
to illuminate the inside of the car. And then he said, what else he said, which was very disturbing to me. And I just kind of felt like when I heard him say it, he was being a predator. So what he said was he turns on the shot lights, if I'm not mistaken. He says he turns on the shot lights to illuminate and to mask him walking up to the vehicle.
Well, no, they tried to minimize that because they were asked, is that one of the purposes? He's like, yeah, that's also a reason. They were cagey about wanting to say that's why. They said it was just to look inside
but
the
he
vehicle.
said it. And then when he said he was standing like right next to the driver door, he could see Luke laying all the way back, completely reclined in the seat. And then Catalani says that he leaned over, so these bright lights are actually
so here
masking him.
We have it up now.
Okay.
So
and then he says, I do this little stupid thing. I wave. And they said, well, why do you do that little stupid thing that you do? He said, oh, that's to make people comfortable. And I felt like that was a predatory act on his part. Like what he said was, it was almost like it was something that was ritualistic for him.
well, no, I think
what
he's talking about.
No, turn on the light, blind the person, walk over, get them comfortable, and then the attack. Because that is exactly what it sounded like when he was talking. It sounded like he was a predator to me. It was very disturbing to me because this is something that he said he did all the time. He said, I call in and say, we're going to pull this guy out all the time.
No, I'll correct you there because what he was saying though is with I do the wave thing all the time, and that was like, I know people who've worked in different jobs and they like made a conscious effort to like say, call people friend or chief or whatever. Like,
right.
I think he was trying to say that as far as why he does the goofy wave.
Let's put that, if we can, get to that part and put that on so that people can see what I'm saying, because I know what he said was that he does the little silly wave all the time. He said that. But what he also said that like I said, that was disturbing was that when he put the shot light on, it was to mask him coming up. And to me, these are actions together, consequent, what do you call it? When it's like numbered, I can't even. Sequential. So these are sequential acts on Catalani's part that made me believe that he has a predatory conduct that he expresses all the time when he engages drivers. And to me, it just seemed like, oh, this little silly wave that I do, just to get people comfortable. Then I snatch the door open and pop him out of the car, so that the person will be at ease. Like he blinds them. He does this little silly wave which just sounds like an act of a predator. It doesn't sound like an act of a police officer who's engaged in a community policing. And again, what was the purpose? What was the purpose of, it's a legally parked car. He had done nothing illegal. He says he sees this top, which I don't believe he could have seen. Because one thing I think that, as you post pictures and you're able to let people see, all these pictures that were taken of the interior of the vehicle were taken after the vehicle moved. And there was a lot of bouncing and juggling going on around inside the vehicle between Rhodes and Luke. And so I just thought it was interesting that everything was still perfectly in the place. Just Catalani said he saw it when he arrived.
Yeah.
These are things that are very disturbing to me when we're looking at what they've said so far. I just think that this guy is not honest about what happened.
I always pull straight on so that my lights would shine at it, and I give myself a little bit of a walkway so that I could walk up to a car safely, and that if another car is coming behind me, it has to go out further around, so I give myself a little bit of a walking path.
So what he's pointing out here, and it's in one of the overhead things where they show there's Luke's cars on side of the road, and then Catalani pulled up behind it, but off to the left, like a full like car width off to the left. So he puts his shining light on, but the point is that like where that light's coming from, he's absolutely backlit.
And that was my concern, was that Luke could not. They didn't blind Luke if the light was behind him. The only way they could have blinded
Well,
Luke,
they did blind him from seeing who was there.
but here's what I'm saying. Yes, they blinded him from the back on that part, but actually blinding him and throwing his senses off, the shot light would have had to been in the front, in the car that was pulled around in front.
Well,
of
that would
Luke's
be
car.
Rhodes' car,
and that would have been Rhodes' car.
And yeah, I'm trying to find out what Rhodes had to say about using his light.
I don't think Rhodes ever said anything about using his light. Yeah, I don't recall him saying anything. But I just, listening to all of...
Tell us about the spotlight.
And who is that? That's Catalani?
This is Rhodes.
Okay.
As indicated in opening statement, was your spotlight on that day?
I don't remember.
Was Officer Catalani's on that day?
I believe it was.
I don't remember, so he doesn't remember if his light was on.
So it's interesting to me, and the reason I believe that Rhodes's vehicle had the shot light on too was because Catalani said he never saw Rhodes get in the car. He didn't know Rhodes was in the car. He didn't see Rhodes in the car. So my question is, how didn't he see Rhodes in the car?
So
How
if those
didn't
lights were also
exactly?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So he was double blind from lights.
Exactly.
Catalani is equally blind. Yeah.
So did he blind him? Like, this definitely is not policy, is it?
No.
That everybody gets blinded in this situation.
No matter what, we're getting to one of the instances that the defense witness, the expert witness, Melvin Tucker pointed out was what was missing here was communication. Mm-hmm. What was missing here was also what they tried to do was box in Luke's car so that if for whatever reason he was going to try and leave, he was pinned in. They didn't do it correctly according to like their own testimony. If they did what they say they did, which is Rhodes' car was like several feet back from Luke, enough that he could pull around it.
But we still have a situation. Let's go all the way back. Let's just go all the way back. What probable cause? What had Luke done?
Exactly.
Why would you block in his car for the purpose of not allowing him to leave? This is a false imprisonment. Why are you snatching someone out of a vehicle who
This is what I said at the beginning, right?
All of this, if we just kind of just stick at the beginning, we don't have the reason why they did this other than what I believe it's just their predatory conduct. They've done this before. This was a normal, natural behavior for them, whether it was policy, which was allegedly not policy for the Euclid Police Department, for them to do these things.
No, go ahead.
Okay, there's no legal reason for what they did. The fact that they did not turn on their body camera, their dash camera,
that was against policy.
Against policy.
Reckless.
Rhodes admits that he was in the car where his microphone was charging, and he did not put the microphone back on. He didn't turn on the dash cam. He did not identify himself as a police officer.
And it was a pretty cringe in a good way moment. When they were cross-examining, I think it was Catalani, and asked, can you describe the process for turning on your dash cam?
Yeah.
Oh, you just flip a switch.
You just flip a switch. It's just a switch, a little switch on the side of the black box. He's just a little switch, and they
That-
say, "Oh, well, how do you turn on your microphone?" Oh, it's just a little switch. Flip the
a
switch.
switch.
So we're talking about
Well, this is where I was saying with Melvin was pointing out with like the communication. A, like you're saying, what's the probable cause to do anything? But B, if you're okay, we're gonna worst case scenario. This guy's gonna wake up and be difficult to deal with. Why not really take your time, communicate? Okay, you're gonna do this because clearly they didn't. It was some improvised plan. If Catalani's saying, I had no idea he got all the way in the car, like, and said I didn't know he was going to get in the car, and so that right there just signals like they had all the time in the world. He's a sleeping man.
But they admitted that it was at least 4 minutes between the time that Rhodes arrived and then they made these decisions to pull the car around the front and blind him and open the door. They admitted that they had 4 minutes, which would have took less than 30 seconds to flip the switches. But there's still that question of, why did you do this? Like, was this for fun? Was this something that you guys have done so often? You never got caught. Nobody's ever, told on you because of fear or whatever. This was not something that is an isolated incident, in my opinion. It just was not isolated. And I would really love to see more people come forward and not be afraid to tell of their experiences, whether it was with these two people or other people that are engaging in law enforcement. Because I'm very cautious about calling people police officers, especially when I know that certain people are not certified under Ohio law, which also is something that I caught in the testimony, which I thought was interesting because the defense kept pushing that issue. They kept pushing the issue of what kind of training do you take? What kind of training have you taken?
Yeah, they were leaning into that, and
they were
all ready to jump on the fact that there were in the in-house Euclid training these tasteless jokes. One has like two the type of figures that look like men's room, women's room figures.
Right.
One is a SWAT team officer beating someone that's like, unarmed and on the ground, and it says protecting and serving the poop out of you. And they tried to be like, that's just irony to break things up, and it's actually very serious.
Here's what I would love for you to do is really to show everyone Mitchell Hauser's testimony just at the very beginning where they're discussing what you're talking about. Yeah, please pull that up. It was disturbing. It was very disturbing listening to Mitchell Hauser, who is supposed to be the training officer of the Euclid Police Department. And for him he was justifying the use of those figures and what was said. But I just think it's disturbing because I can tell you now that the curriculum and lesson plan that he approved, that he said someone else wrote, because remember he said someone else wrote it, and that he approved of it, was not approved by the state of Ohio as required by law. So when they do these in-service trainings, when they do these in-service trainings, these in-house trainings, they are supposed to send that curriculum and lesson plan to the state of Ohio to get approval for it. And it was not approved by the state of Ohio. Also, I know for a fact that,
when defensive tactics training became a subject of training for the Euclid Police Department.
Yes, as soon as I became the training officer, I wanted to begin updating our use of force and our training curriculum with respect to officer and subject control.
And did you have any role in designing or approving this training?
Yes, I asked our subject experts to put together a lesson plan for me. That is the lesson plan put together by Officer Paniotu, and I ultimately approved it.
And so we're clear, we're referring to Plaintiff's Exhibit 35.
So you can see the camera moving. I was having trouble getting it static, so I just kept it on Hauser, so we won't see the exhibits, but I know I can describe what they are when we get to it.
Alleged protecting and serving the poop out of you.
Yes.
You approved that?
I did.
So here's where he's minimizing
I felt that it was
protecting
an
and
attempt
serving
at humor and satire. It's a very serious subject matter, and I felt that beginning the training with a little bit of lightheartedness might ease the training day.
Sir, does that represent the point of view of the Euclid Police Department in giving this training?
No, it does not.
Okay, stop right there for me. So you hear him say that he approved of this, serving the, what is it? Serving,
Protecting
protecting
and serving the
the
poop
out of you. So this was humorous to him. And I don't see the humor and I think you may have caught it when you go a little bit further up in terms of what the exhibit was of these two darkened figures, one of them a police officer beating an unarmed person.
Yeah, it's way back.
It's way back, yeah.
I have it
But
way back. in the
they,
thing,
you know,
but-
here's the thing: is that they follow up by saying that, and I think this was done on Cross with Marcus Sidoti when he did the cross on him. He asked him, "Don't you include a video of Chris Rock?"
Exactly.
Who's laughing, who's kind of joking about it, you know, if you don't want to get, if as a black person, if you don't want to get beat up by police, always have a white friend with you. And he's like, yeah, we put that in there. So there is a minimizing, which you can see in the culture of this police department. There's a minimizing of the relationship between African Americans and Caucasians, and especially the Caucasians who are wearing badges. Okay. There's a minimizing of the value of the human life, and he tries to clean it up by saying, well, this is the real mission of the police department. So show that part.
Determinations of whether or not to use of force.
Never.
So I'd like to peel back the cover of this for a minute, and I'd like you to take a look at the contents of that training, if you.
Well, then he goes through the in-house training. Yeah, and they tried to say that, like, oh, that thing was only on the written slot, on the printout,
Yeah.
but not what
Yeah.
the officers got. But it's still, if that's what the person giving the training is sitting there in their idle time doodling, that kind of shows you what's in their head.
Well,
Like the person who's at the top, like, that doesn't make me feel that much better.
someone who has been a school teacher, a substitute school teacher, who has written lesson plans and curriculum, I can tell you now that when I see the training lesson plan, the lesson here that he said was done on a he said it was done on the PowerPoint. That this does not serve a legal purpose. It does not. There's nothing there of meat and value which would edify a person in law enforcement. And we see as he goes on and speaks and he's talking about this, and I think on Cross, it comes out about bed bugs, I think it was.
Yeah, there was a meme that showed like a bunch of officers like whipping out shotguns and aggressive, and then it said something like when you see a bed bug.
Right.
And they were trying to say like, oh well, there's a big problem all over Euclid with bed bugs.
Right. And then he went into this long drawn out thing about we have a new dryer and washing machine.
Yeah, that was a long.
It was weird. That was so weird.
We learned a lot about the dryer facilities.
That's in the fire department. And so, it's concerning to me to hear someone like Mitchell Hauser, who has not taken the mandated training himself and who has not been certified to teach a training, and what this training is called. This training is called was a de-escalation type of training. I believe it was captioned.
Defensive training tactics.
Defensive training tactics. And so the question is, does that meet the continued professional training requirements that are required to be taught in police departments? Well, I can tell you now, no, they are not. Because that is a huge issue, which we've touched base on many times, is that these departments are not taking the community policing training that they're required by law to take. And so you have someone like Mitchell Hauser, who is not trained himself, who is not certified to teach the community policing, and all he really has is firearm training. And so he's teaching those things in which only he knows. And so it was disturbing to me because as he continued to discuss the policy in East Cleveland and how he tells the officers,
Not East Cleveland.
I'm sorry,
Euclid.
they're the same to me though, but you're right, Euclid. He discusses how the policy is never to pull your firearm out in a moving car if you're in a moving car with someone. The policy is never to do this, this, and this. And everything he was saying was showing the recklessness of Matthew Rhodes and Louis Catalani in their engagement with Luke Stewart, because he's saying, I never taught them this stuff. This is what I taught them. I tell them to do this, this, and this, and our policy says this and this. So I think it really crucified Matthew Rhodes when he testified about what he does not teach them.
Now, what is the legal standard of recklessness that they need to prove? Because to me, abandoning policy, not following policy, like you could, there are all kinds of police confrontations, I think, where they can say, like for instance, the Vincent Belmonte and Larry McDonald didn't get his body camera on. They were able to say he tried to comply with policy because he turned it on, and then they can say accidentally he was in the heat of a chase, right? None of that exists here.
None of
to say
that.
That's what I'm saying. They had 3 minutes when they arrived at the scene. There's no reason not to follow. They didn't follow body camera policies about everything at all.
Even the traffic policies, they did not adhere to the traffic
They
policies.
didn't turn on their red and blue lights.
Right. They did not identify themselves. They did not tell Luke why they were there. They did not.
And all of that to me has to be like that's where recklessness starts, right?
Well, recklessness.
You're not following the rules.
Right. So recklessness is when you go out, you have a duty, no matter what your job is, whatever your job description is, you have a duty to follow the rules and to stay within the rules. And so that is where your protection comes from. It's because at all times you were acting within the rules, you were acting within the policy. But what we see here in this particular instance, to their own admittance, and what they never say this, is that they were concerned about him, that this was a wellness call, that they wanted to make sure he was okay. What we don't see is we don't hear Louis Catalani or Matthew Rhodes saying, we not only saw a tap in the car, we saw empty bottles in the car, we saw drugs in the car, we saw guns in the car. We don't see any of those things being stated. And so it leaves you to wonder, why did they do this if it weren't for anything other than they were used to doing it? It was habitual for them. It was fun for them. It was fun and games for them. They have been harassing and terrorizing the Euclid community for quite some time. And this time it backfired on them. It backfired badly, because every time I see that face that you have up on the screen right now, every time I see that face concerning Matthew Rhodes, what I see is someone trying to figure out, how did I get in this position? We've done this before. Like, I don't know how this happened. He really doesn't. He doesn't know how things escalated and got out of control, because they've always had control before. They've always been able to maneuver and manipulate the person that they were doing this to. And in this instance, they woke up a young man who was literally realizing he was in a fight for his life. And he was trying to live. He was trying to survive. And why was Matthew Rhodes in that vehicle? We just don't have, car moving 13 miles an hour is really not moving. It's just kind of gliding down the street a little bit here and there.
Well, and that gets to the other part of this where it's like, there was no reason to jump in the car because A, you put yourself in danger.
Exactly.
B, there's really no way to disable a driver safely. Like he shot Rhodes, and that's the other thing. He shot him once they were in neutral. they were stopped, and he was just
Exactly.
like, I was worried he was going to get the car back into drive, and so that's why he had to die.
Right, and it made no sense because he had already paralyzed his right arm. So let's get a picture here. He tased him into his right shoulder, and he literally has paralyzed this right hand. So what was he really afraid of? Because there's no way that Luke, if he was incapacitated on this side of his body where the taser had gone into, could have reached up to do anything to put the car in drive or anything
Well,
else.
I don't know how, like, the taser discussion was, that it only deployed into the right arm, so that's the only place it could have been incapacitated, but at a certain point, it wasn't on anymore, and I don't think
But
tasers
31
have the
seconds.
lingering.
It was on 31 seconds.
It was
31
it was
seconds.
shocking for
It
that
was
long?
shocking him. Yes, the little black box on the taser was 31 seconds. It was shocking him. And so in that 31 seconds, he decided to pull out his gun and shoot Luke. 31 seconds is a long time. It really is. People may not think it, but it really is a long time to get your thought process together. Luke is not in a position where he can reach up and do anything at this point because he incapacitated the right side of his body. And so he incapacitated that side. So what was he really afraid of? I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me that he would be in a closed car, and that he would pull out his weapon, which his weapon already had to be out because you have to unhook. I carry guns, so I know. And so you have to unhook something at some point. Like he's tasing him and he's taking the gun out at the same time. He has to be.
It also, and this was, Rhodes admitted, this was the first time he'd ever actually used his taser
taser on anyone.
The other thing to point out is, like, and I've looked at the we talked about the really bad parts of the training manual, but I skimmed through the whole thing. Taser training is a massive part of it. It's all these, like, here's how you tase someone from an elevated position, all these different things or whatever. You know what I didn't see covered in there? I don't recall, but certainly should be. And it was brought up to with the defense expert talking about how things should have gone, or is it a good idea to tase someone in a car? And if he had tased him properly, that got the appropriate spread and caused the whole body to do the thing where it seizes up, do you really want someone whose hands are on the wheel of a car and whose foot is on the gas pedal to seize up and lose control of those extremities? Because that's what would have happened. And again, this was reckless.
Well, here's the other thing.
But they do, what's real, another thing that's, they're doing the same thing with the defense that I sensed BCI was doing in the interviews about these, because there's another thing about this case that's bizarre and frustrating is both officers were allowed 6 days before they gave any statement.
6 days is nothing because they gave Larry McDonald 30-something days before they interviewed him after
I mean,
killing
it's a
him.
common thing where that no other suspect or someone involved in a crime is afforded that. But
I've got huge issues with BCI. You know that. I really think the Department of Justice needs to go in and they need to really look at BCI's investigations. I think that their investigations are very faulty. I think that they are not unbiased. I think they're very prejudicial to make sure that peace officers walk away from doing, these type of event incidents that occur. I think that BCI holds a lot of responsibility when it comes to, police not being prosecuted and held accountable. And I think that goes back to the Attorney General's office because he's over BCI. So we have an Attorney General who's up for re-election right now, and he has done absolutely nothing to deal with these type of incidents. I mean, look how many people have died under his watch. Vincent Belmonte has died under his watch. Luke Stewart has died under his watch. Arthur Keiths has died under his watch. And all of these people have been that one, have no record of training, no record of annual gun requalifications, that are not supposed to be in these departments anyway. All of them have been cleared by BCI. Like, how insane can this possibly be? Like, nobody does anything wrong. Nobody was at fault.
Well, and what's always
victims.
missing from BCI too, and what's missing from this case with these jurors is the holistic overview, and the fact that, like, okay, you take this case in isolation, but the whole reason State of Injustice became the three-parter it was is because we found out about all these other cases of abuse surrounding this, or brutalizing the black community, having no regard for them, seeing
Richard
them,
Hubbard being
Richard,
snatched out of the vehicle by Michael
Shajon Gray.
Ambiat. Okay, we're looking at all these
and
incidents.
Amira Spencer,
Right.
the Playmore.
Everyone who has been victimized by any police department in the state of Ohio has always become it was their fault. It was your fault, not the peace officer's fault. And when we look at the totality of what BCI is not doing and what the Attorney General's office is not doing to protect the very people that pay their salaries. Okay, we pay their salaries. We are their bosses. This is the only profession in the world where the employees can kill the employers and get away with it. Like, this is insane. It's just absolutely insane. And then you have the other employees who are covering up for the misconduct. So, and that kind of brings me back full circle to Louis Catalani. I don't believe the events occurred as he stated. I think there's a lot of issues. Now, here's what I did enjoy about Catalani. I'm going to tell you something. This was interesting. Catalani has had some experience and some kind of training to speak to juries. Now, if he's watching this, I want him to know where he botched it. So when you are in a courtroom and you are testifying, it is always good to speak clearly and loudly and make sure that when you get asked a question, you turn your whole body to the jury and look at him. Watch this. I love this part. He's speaking with confidence and he's convincing the jury of the story that he has, but he's not turning his body. He's only turning his head. So his body language is he's lying about something. Okay. So when he turns his head and he doesn't turn the rest of his body, he's not being fully honest with the jury. Okay. And so that was kind of funny to me. Now, here's where it became extremely comical to me. He was so confident when he was being examined by the defense attorney on direct. He's so confident and he's just talking but when he
I want to make the montage. I want to actually show this when I edit up this footage.
This
I want to show that he gets very quiet
when he
really
gets
called out about like clear inconsistencies.
Yeah, he was like, and so the judge is like, hey, you're sitting right in front of that microphone. Speak up. We can't hear you. The confidence walks out the door. He stops interacting with the jury. He stops looking at the jury. And when he does look at the jury, look at his eyes. Look at his eyes. He looks up at the ceiling. He kind of looks down. He comes back a little bit. His body language is telling me he's not being truthful with what he's saying. And his voice, the inflections are gone. Like, he's not confident in what he's saying anymore. The story that he came up with, it's not working. It's not working. And like you said, the inconsistencies. My belief is, and I said this to you, and I said this to a couple other people, and I actually went and talked to a mechanic to ask him if I was assuming this to be correctly. I don't believe Catalani was in the car when he said he was in the car. I don't believe, and I think that Catalani is just trying to save his brother in blue's butt. I do not believe he was in the car. This is my perception. I can't prove this. This is just my opinion. Okay, this is my opinion and what I've listened to his testimony. I don't believe he was in the car pulling Luke out like he says he was. I just don't believe it. I don't believe that he had Luke in a headlock kind of situation and he doesn't see his partner in the car.
Well, he said he never got in the car. He said he opened the door and he just started pulling from the door. And if his head is above, I can see how he wouldn't even know that. But I don't believe, I could be with you, Larry. He didn't know, when he tries to say, I didn't know Rhodes was going to go do his push thing. I think the push-pull thing, I can buy they both did that because I think they have both
They've
done
done it before, and they had already agreed to do it when he pulled up and they were talking, and he pulled the car around to block Luke's car in. They had already had a game plan on what they were going to do to Luke. He knew that. I just don't believe the push-pull thing that he said happened. I just don't believe that. It's probably happened to someone else with the two of them. And that because I believe it was a common practice for them to do these type of things. In this instance, I don't believe Catalani. His body language, his eyes, the inflections are gone. He's not confident when he's expressing this on cross. There's some things, there's a huge gap that's missing. And the other part, he said, which was interesting, he had jumped back and because the car was coming and he saw the car was going to may hit him. And so he jumped up, he let Luke go and he jumped back so he didn't get crushed between the vehicles, the car and the vehicle. And then he says, when Luke's car hit Rhodes's car, he heard the transmission grind and knew that the car went out of commission. But there was no damage to Rhodes's car whatsoever.
Yeah, that was another kind of comical moment when they pulled up. They're like, "Can you point out where the damage to your car is?"
Exactly. And here's the thing. So this is why I call my friend that's a mechanic, because I used to work on cars too, and I just kind of refreshing my memory on this. And so I said to my friend, I said, "Hey, let me ask you a question. If I'm in the car and I have my foot on the brake and the car is in drive, I'm going to say drive. Let's say the car is in drive or even in neutral, whatever. The car is in gear. It's not in park. It's in gear. And a car impacts me and starts pushing my car backwards. Will I hear the transmission grind?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "Okay, if I'm outside the vehicle, will I hear the transmission grind?" He said, "No, you'll only hear it if you're inside the vehicle or underneath the vehicle." So it's inconsistent when Catalani says that he heard the transmission grind when Luke hit the car and quote, he knew the car went out of commission. That's what he said. "I just knew that car went out of commission." And then I'm running down the street chasing this car that's going 13 miles an hour. He's running down the street chasing this car. And I knew Matthew was behind me, or Matthew was getting into the other car and going to be coming down and picking me up. There's some serious inconsistencies in that testimony. The testimony doesn't make sense. I think, this is my opinion, I can't prove it. I think Catalani was in Rhodes's car and had turned the shot lights on, and Matthew got into the car on the passenger side, and that's when the struggle began. That's when all the stuff hit. And then he jumped, when the car got around, he jumps out of Rhodes's car because, mind you, Rhodes's car had moved back. Remember, the car had moved backwards several feet from where he initially said the car had been. He jumps out of the car because, like he said, he thought it was out of commission. He heard the transmission grind, and that's when he took off running down the street. And he's on his little thing, and he's calling it in, car, black male, and he's calling in all of this stuff and a panic. What he doesn't testify to, and you never heard him say this, so I want you to go back and watch this again. You never hear Catalani say, "When I got to the car, I heard the gunshots."
Yes. Yeah, that was strange that he didn't hear them.
He said he got to the car, he never heard the gunshots. And then he said Matt got out the car, and Matt just kept saying he wouldn't stop the effing car. He wouldn't stop the effing car. But he never heard the gunshots. He never states one time, while I'm running after this car, I see the car stop. And just as I get close enough to the car, I see the two of them engaging. Remember he says, I see them in the car. They're engaging. They're fighting. But he never says he hears the gunshots. That tells me he wasn't there. He was not present like he said he was. Matthew Rhodes also testified that it was another officer who greeted him, so to speak, when he got out of the vehicle. Catalani said he was the one that went to him when he got out of the car and he was screaming. There's too many inconsistencies in this story.
Eventually, this person in the car was going to be awoken by you, and you acknowledge that a person being woken out of a state of sleep or being passed out can be startled when they are awoken, right?
That is a possibility.
Right, so in that 3 minutes that you're walking around your right by your car, you know you're gonna pull him out of your car. You know that he could potentially, very likely be disoriented when he's awoken suddenly in the dark from very deep sleep. And yet you still don't think it's important to turn on your red and blue lights to identify yourself as a police officer?
I did not do it at the time.
Okay.
That was a couple of those moments where they're like, just like, you didn't think this was important, and they don't answer the question. It's like, they just say, well, I didn't do it. But they don't say, like, they can't say, I didn't think it was important.
Now look at the picture. He's completely turned and engaged with her. He's not looking at or responding to the jury like he did when he was being examined by defense. Mm-hmm. His body language is very different than it was, and his voice is like, no, I didn't. I didn't. Like he's not the same confident person who got on the stand when he was being examined.
Yeah.
So you choose not to identify yourself as a police officer by turning on your red and blue lights, even though nothing prevented you to. And instead you put on your takedown lights, right? And those are the bright lights that come from the top of your light bar, right?
Yes.
How do you turn those on?
From the button on the siren box.
Okay, right next to the button where you turn on your red and blues?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, God.
One of the purposes of turning on your takedown lights is to mask your appearance, mask your presence as you approach the car, right?
Yes, that can be one of the purposes.
And historically, that's why takedown lights are used, right?
Well, that and illumination of the car.
Okay. So you're there. You decide that you're going to pull them out. You decide not to turn on your red and blues, and you decide to turn on just your takedown lights to mask your appearance. Is that accurate?
I turned on my takedown lights to illuminate the car.
And to mask your appearance.
Right in the car.
Your presence as you approach the car.
Yeah, that's a typically accepted reasoning for it.
And that's why you did it.
Yeah, to illuminate the car.
And mask the appearance of your body as you're approaching the car, right?
Sure.
Let's talk about
But
what you
also
saw
to
inside
light
that
the
car.
car. Just as much. Both. Not just.
So when you got to the scene, you took your flashlight and you walked up to the driver's side of the car, right?
Yes.
And that's when you see the man is sleeping there.
Yes.
Now, the man sleeping in the car, a legally parked car, this is just like a normal residential street, right?
Yes.
I mean, the police station's right at the corner. Just, everyday people are living there, right?
Sure.
So a car is legally parked there and someone's sleeping in the driver's seat. That's not indication of illegal behavior, right?
No.
You did testify that you ran the plates.
Yes.
And you discovered that whoever owned the car had some issues with the police with some warrants or something, but you were certain that the person inside that car was not the owner, right?
Now, I want you to notice the whole time he's engaging with her, he never turns to the jury. He never responds to the jury with the same type of confidence, and he doesn't turn his head to engage the jury, to respond, to convince them he's telling the truth. He is holding back a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff that he's not telling, and he's afraid, and you can see the fear on his face. Actually, he's afraid she's going to ask him a question that he might actually have to answer and tell the truth.
Well, you can tell that he doesn't like having to answer when she says, and the point of it is to mask your appearance. Because it is. It's It's in the, this is why you use this thing. He can't say, no.
Right.
I no.
And then he eventually, after 3 times, he just says, sure, that's why I did it. Of course, that's why he did it. And if she kept pushing him, she would have got more out of him, because it seems like three times is a charm with this guy. There's a lot of stuff. There's a huge gap there. And there are things that were testified to by Rhodes and by Catalani, which were completely inconsistent with each other's testimony. And I in my spirit, like I said, I can't prove it. I just don't believe Catalani was as involved with what happened with Luke as they try to play this out. I just don't believe it. I think that Rhodes did a lot of stuff on his own, and that Catalani, who's been his partner in crime for quite some time, is trying to protect his buddy. He's just trying to protect him. And I got to give Marcus Sidoti, like 20 points. He is like the best. I told Marcus Sidoti, I said, listen, if I ever go into a courtroom and I see you're going to come and cross-examine me, I'm just going to admit I did it and leave. Like, I will never give you an opportunity to cross-examine me. I think that's Marcus there.
Yeah.
I think Marcus Sidoti is a very good attorney. When he was doing cross, there were a couple things I wish he'd hit on a little bit harder, but I think he did a great job in terms of cross-examining everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was something they just hit on a bit ago that I was wishing they'd hit on more, but it's left my brain now. So yeah, they're definitely not going there. It seems like the defense has brought up training almost more than the plaintiff, and almost like because they were anticipating the plaintiff to hinge on that, but that made more sense under the Monell claim, where they're trying to, when they were trying to hold the city accountable because you're training officers to act like this. This time around, they're kind of having it the other way. They're saying it's like, okay, your policies aren't great, but even going by them would have been better than what they did.
Exactly, and it almost seemed to me like when Mitchell Hauser was testifying that he was like literally handing Matthew Rhodes over on a platter. Like, I didn't train him to do this stuff. This is not our policy. In fact, I told them don't do this. I told them don't do that. And I really kind of felt like that was crucifying the defense. It wasn't helping the defense at all. Because again, the plaintiffs are trying to establish a recklessness to his conduct and what he did. Honestly, I don't believe we will ever know the truth about what happened with Luke. I don't believe we will ever know if they were both in that car, or only one of them were in the car, or how that actually took place, because the only other person that could really tell us what happened, they murdered him. He's gone, and we can't get it from Luke. Luke can't tell us. What we do know is that you are in a stationary vehicle, you have incapacitated the right side of his body, and you decide to pull out a weapon while you're holding the taser, because that's the only way you get your gun out. You're tasing him for 31 seconds, and you pull this weapon out and you shoot him. You shoot him 3 times, and you didn't kill him because he testified. Luke said to him, what? You shot me.
Yeah.
He was still alive and possibly could have saved his life, but he decided to take that one extra shot after Luke said, you shot me, and he killed Luke. And you hear the EMT say when they arrived, there was nothing, that he was gone. There was nothing that they could do to revive him. And that is because that fatal shot was the last shot, the 4th shot. And why did Rhodes decide to take that shot? But more importantly to me is, why did BCI clear him? Why was he cleared? He had no legal reason to engage Luke Stewart. There was nothing there that indicated Luke was a threat, that Luke posed a threat or could have posed a threat. There was nothing in their own testimonies that said that once he entered into Luke's car, he put himself into danger. That was crossing a line he should not have crossed, snatching a vehicle door open to pull somebody out that had not committed a crime. Why did BCI think it was okay for them to do this? You're going to justify this shooting by saying, well, he was in the heat of the moment. I've told you the narrative has changed. He wasn't supposed to be there.
Exactly.
He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to put the shot lights on. He wasn't supposed to pull him out of the car or jump into Luke's car or open the car door. They had no legal reason for their conduct. And why the Attorney General, Dave Yost, allows BCI to continue to operate like this and not hold these people accountable, it's government-sanctioned murder of African Americans. And we've got to be real about that. We've got to have real conversation about that. And we've got to really start holding these people who are elected to office accountable for not... This testimony right here that we've heard this week, there is no reason these two should not be in handcuffs. There's no reason why they have not been indicted. It makes no sense to me when they admitted
Now, what do you think?
all of those things.
What are the ramifications of this civil trial having a positive outcome for the Stewart family and Rhodes? Is that, in your opinion, going to make any sort of waves towards positive change?
No.
Like, you know.
No, and the reason why
I mean, other than
won't-
hopefully alleviating some of the suffering of the Stewart family and giving them some comfort, that as minimal as it is.
No, the problem is that here's the problem with our system of justice. The system is willing to pay millions of dollars in a civil lawsuit for wrongful conduct, wrongful death, and not willing to put these people behind bars to stop them from doing it again. That is the problem. They're willing to give all the money in the world. Take it. Take the money. But it doesn't change, and it doesn't create accountability for people who are, one, not supposed to be there because they never took their training, their mandated training. They told the state they didn't take their mandated training. The state has nothing in place to remove them or to prosecute them if they continue to operate in law enforcement. And now they've moved up the ladder into committing perjury on the stand because Matthew Rhodes and Louis Catalani committed perjury when they testified, when they were asked under oath, did you take training? ... Yes, I took training at this department. I took training at that department. Before I came over here, we took lots of training. Well, when Matthew Rhodes said it, I wanted to jump up and say, you a DAMN lie, because I got your records from Maple Heights and you never took training, and Maple Heights said you didn't take training. Okay? I wanted to jump up and say to Louis Catalani, you a lie, because I got your records from all your departments and there was no record of training for any peace officer, let alone you, from those departments. So when we're talking about holding accountability, it has to start with the Attorney General's office, with BCI, with the Ohio Peace Officer Training Academy. All of them have an administrative and they have a ministerial duty to make sure these people are taking the community training that is required by law. And when they don't take it, just like they do security officers, they go to the security officers when they don't take their training and their gun recalls. They go to security officers and take their guns from them and send them home, take their white cards and say, until you turn this in, we are not giving it to you. And that's PIGSLR. But OPATA doesn't do that. They don't take the initiative to go in and audit these departments to see who's working in these departments, if they've actually taken training. They're not looking at the curriculum and lesson plans that are being used. They're not approving them. And they're like, hey, do whatever you want to do. And lives are being lost, and there seems to be no value with the Attorney General's office and BCI that these mothers have lost their sons. And for what reason? For what reason? Arthur Keese running away, shot in the back, killed by somebody who not only didn't take training, but failed his annual gun requalifications every year. Under Ohio law, not supposed to be carrying a firearm. Do you know when you look at these BCI reports, they never look at whether or not they were compliant with training and annual gun requalifications? You don't see any of that in there.
That's what I was saying before, is like the BCI investigations. It's like they're always so narrow, and they don't take into account bigger things.
They're
like that,
faulty.
or the department's overall reputation. And yeah, there's no one like really scrutinizing them. It's usually like, well, let's help you get a good story together.
Well,
but
the one that the investigator at BCI who investigated the Vincent Belmonte death, his name is Corey Mamchalov.
Yeah.
He's a police officer, no record of training. This dude has no record of training himself. So, of course, he's not going to look at and see that Larry McDonald did something wrong. He wasn't supposed to be there. He didn't do it himself, which is a problem because we have too many people that are working in investigative positions, whether it's a police department or BCI, that have never taken the training. And so we're talking about how many unsolved murders there are. Well, how can you solve a murder when you've never taken training to solve a murder? People are being promoted within agencies, because they've been there for 27 years. In fact, the guy that's on the screen right now, Mitchell Hauser, he's been there for 27 years. He was a patrol officer, and I heard him testify that he became a detective, but he doesn't have any training to be a detective. And this is what drives me insane, is to see how many people are engaging in law enforcement wearing a gun and a badge, and they have not complied with laws, but they are enforcing laws. Okay? They have not complied with minimal standards of taking 1 hour of domestic violence, which is way not enough for somebody.
That is the really frustrating thing about what you've uncovered, is like they're resisting taking these continued professional training courses that they're all like, they fall outside of your standard like violent jump out tactics, firearms training, and things like that. And we're incensed that there are departments where they are not taking the bare minimum they're supposed to. But even if they were, it's not enough.
It's still not enough, right?
And
right.
I gotta wrap up here. I'm gonna have a Halloween weekend.
Oh, cool! Because I gotta
here.
go eat. I am starving. I haven't eaten today. I've been working all day doing
I wanted
stuff
to let everyone know. So what's coming up on Monday will be the final witness for the defense. It is a man goes by the name John Jack Ryan. Which makes him fun to Google. He's a law enforcement. He'll be the defense expert on the other side of things. And he was actually brought in. I've been researching him a bit. He was brought in on the Freddie Gray to and preventing that officer's conviction too. So he was called in on that. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes up with to explain why this was all fine and good. And then once that he's done testifying, then the jury begins deliberating, and that's going to be a really, really emotional moment to capture, to be there for.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping that the jury is picking up on the inconsistencies, but also focusing and honing on the fact that there was no legal purpose for them to engage Luke whatsoever.
Yes.
He had not done anything illegal. He had not committed any crime. He did not have a warrant out for him. There was nothing that he had said or done that would have provoked them attacking him. And that even with the, Mitchell Hauser testifying that this is not our policy. We don't train them to get in cars. We don't train them to pull their weapons out if they do get into a car. We don't train them. So I really don't think that there's a whole lot that Jack Ryan can say to justify what's already been heard. It doesn't matter what he says. They've already admitted they did not identify themselves. They had no reason to do what they did. They violated every single policy and alleged training that they had received. So when you talk about recklessness, I don't know how much more reckless you could possibly be than what we've heard in the past week in terms of their own testimony. Their testimony is disturbing. It's extremely disturbing.
Yeah. And this trial, I end up sitting there thinking somewhat the same thing as I did when I watched your grandson's trial, and seeing this jury of people taking in this one awful story about this police department. And it's the thing I keep thinking, like, if only I could get more people following me to like watch.
Watch and see this,
because that is something where I'm thinking about, like, what's the impact of doing a documentary like the one on Euclid. Honestly, with that and the East Cleveland thing, both of those, I was thinking, like, man, it'd be really great if people who end up on a jury pool had seen this and was thinking of this before. They go into, because that's what's always missing with these juries. And if they're not primed to consider how these very professional looking, very affable, very serious people can get up there and tell very confident, falsehoods through omissions, sometimes outright lies. and or that they're capable of or that their wider department is capable of these kind of things. The jury's just, they're bringing whatever they have to the table, and I hope to expand that consciousness and with each police department I can spend time.
Well,
on.
I'm going to tell you something, and this is going to be very quickly, and then we can wrap up. I feel sorry for Matthew Rhodes. Part of me does. Part of me feels sorry for him because he's in a culture of policing which okays that type of behavior, and that he has purchased that, that culture. He has purchased that culture, lock, stock, and barrel. The problem that I have is that even if you're within that culture, if you are a person with integrity and ethics and you're a professional and you really care about the community that you're policing, no matter what that culture is, you would reject it. You would not engage in it. So I feel sorry for him because he was not integral enough to reject the culture that taught him what he learned. And so now look at that face. That face tells it all. That face tells it all, that he is just a big bad kid that didn't think when he pushed his best friend off the bridge, his best friend would die. Like, I didn't know he would die, and that's the face that you see. I didn't think Luke would die. I didn't think it would turn out this way. You can see that he's just a messed up guy because of the culture of that police department, He purchased it, lock, stock, and barrel, that was okay behavior. And now I think he does have some remorse. I think he is very remorseful. And I'm not sure if the remorse is that he killed Luke or that he got caught.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure what the remorse is, but I do sense some type of remorse from him. I'm not genuinely convinced that he's sorry about killing Luke, because I think part of the testimony that I missed, but I did hear come up when I did come back into the court, is that he went out to a party.
On St. Patrick's Day, yeah, that was the last question they had for Catalani was 3 days after the murder or something like that, 3 or 4 days after Luke died. But before they went to their BCI interview, they were both at a bar having drinks.
And having a good time, which is also the same thing Larry McDonald did.
And that question, I think, put in the jury. It's like, well, so you definitely had an opportunity to get your story straight.
Exactly.
So,
but Vincent Belmonte, when Vincent Belmonte was killed by Larry McDonald was out the next night, and he was caught on camera dancing and partying at a bar. I think it was either a bar or the lodge. But once the video got out that he was out there dancing, they removed it from social media. But this was like the day after he killed him. So these guys have no real connection to humanity and what they've done. Again, I'm not sure if his remorse has anything to do with taking a human life. I think his remorse is that he got caught.
Well, I want to thank you, Mariah, for joining me. And
thanks for having me.
Glad to have you in court. Thanks for watching. I'm going to have more updates and some of this footage cut up, hopefully into a new episode of State of Injustice coming up soon. It's going to be a good one to juxtapose with trial footage of Michael Amiat.
Okay.
So, yeah, but I'm anxiously awaiting to see what this verdict is, and it's going to be a pretty heavy one no matter which way it goes.
And guys, remember, share these videos. Let people know what's going on. Let people get engaged.
Yeah, follow State of Injustice.
Follow us.
If you can support the work, it's very much appreciated. Getting down there every day, paying parking fees. And then I'm not. This is all pro bono work for me. It's all
and for me.
love. Yes.
And for me.
And of course, also check out ChasingJusticeLLC.com.
Yep.
To find out how more about what Mariah does and how you could help her out. And I hope everyone has a happy and safe Halloween weekend.
And save me some candy.